Okay, so Buddhism at 10,000 feet. A good place to start when talking about Buddhism is with the life story of the Buddha. So scholars disagree about which of these events actually happened versus didn't happen, but that's not really super important. The most important thing is like how these themes relate to the teachings of Buddhism generally. So the Buddha was a real guy. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was born about 2,600 years ago in Lumbini, Nepal. And he was born a prince. He was born very wealthy, and he had every luxury in the world, and his dad did not want him to learn about any of the suffering of the world. But he was destined to be the Buddha, so he kind of had to figure out about suffering. And so when he was like a teenager, he was taken like outside the palace on these chariot rides, and like some gods, they kind of conspired to like teach him about suffering. And so he saw a sick man, a dying man, an old man, and then he saw a monk. And he was very confused, and this led him to eventually renounce the princely life and go try to figure out the cure for suffering, how to end suffering. He was an ascetic for a while, like 6 years, I think. And that didn't work. And so then he took food and attained enlightenment, and that was great. And so when he like attained enlightenment, he then like went back and started teaching. And the basics of his teachings are the Four Noble Truths. So they are that life is suffering, nice one, and craving or attachment is the cause of suffering. The end of craving leads to the end of suffering, and the Eightfold Path is how you end craving. So naturally, one might wonder, what's the Eightfold Path? Well, it's a series of like things to do, basically, slash a way of life that has like 8 important steps. So, and they're all like doing something right. So it's right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right concentration, right mindfulness. And those kind of all blend together, but basically the gist is like, be a good person, and there's a specific way to do that, of course, but like live very morally, and then like develop meditative insight to have like the right view and the right understanding of like how the world is, like what things lead to other things, etc. And yeah, so that like wisdom piece is really where the meditation part of Buddhism comes in, because that's really the way that we can cut through our attachments by understanding like there's no self here that like can be grabbing onto things or should be grabbing onto things, etc. And so yeah, the Buddha taught for a long time, and so there are some important like groups within Buddhism. The group that like follows the Buddhist teachings most strictly are typically referred to as Theravada Buddhists. And then there are developments. So like the next kind of development of Buddhism is called Mahayana. And they focus much more on like some different concepts, like emptiness is a really important one. So like all things are empty. There's a very important philosopher named Nagarjuna who said like it's incredibly interesting and hard to read, but he talks all about how like everything is empty, which means like it doesn't exist, but it also exists. For example, there's a thing called like a quad negation, where he'll say, like for Nirvana example, like Nirvana does not exist, but it does not exist, nor does it both not exist and exist, nor does it like not exist and not exist. I butchered that because I'm trying to say it out loud, but it's like there's no possible way that it could be, but then it just like is, and that's called thusness or suchness, and that's a pretty neat concept. And then the next development was Vajrayana, which is so like Mahayana like has like gods and goddesses. Vajrayana is like much more kind of magical seeming in its in the way that it like teaches. Really, they're all the same. Is like what most people will tell you, and that is what like Tibetan Buddhism is. So that's what we learned. They have like the whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, and they ring the bell a lot during the chanting. And that is my best attempt at a 5-minute overview of Buddhism.
Woo!